Hello and welcome to Education Scotland's The Pedagogy Podcast. I'm your host, Bex Ewart, and I will be leading us through some really interesting conversations around about pedagogy with a really wide and broad spectrum of educational professionals, children and young people. This podcast came about as a response to the OECD report, which found that in order to improve the quality of outcomes for our children, practitioners and teachers need to be supported to explore their own pedagogy and their practice through a pedagogical lens. Unsurprisingly, in the early years, it's been a focus, and so there's a lot of research and policy documents and research papers around about the subject of pedagogy. But as we move through the school stages and into secondary school and further education, that reference to pedagogy drops off. We'll be talking to a whole host of educational professionals from the early years through primary, young children and people from various different stages in their education, and then right into further education, exploring pedagogy, what it means to different people, and what we might change and what we might challenge ourselves around to ensure that our education meets the needs of our children and young people as we move into an exciting but unknown future. Hi everybody and welcome to this episode of Education Scotland's The Pedagogy Podcast. And we are joined today by Dr Mhairi Aitken from the Turing Institute. I believe you're an ethics fellow, although perhaps an Essex fellow as well. So Mhairi, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Oh, pleased to be here, thank you.
So I wonder if you could give us a bit of background, please, about where you are and how you find yourself here with us today.
Yeah, sure. Yes, as I said, I'm an ethics fellow at the Turing Institute. The Alan Turing Institute is the UK's National Institute for AI and Data Science. So as an ethics fellow, my role involves research around kind of ethical and social considerations around AI and data science, but it's also looking a lot at kind of emerging policy and regulatory responses to AI. As a national institute, we are the expert advisors on AI and data science. But a lot of my work is really focused on the area of how AI impacts children and how children can be involved in decision making around the future of AI, and that includes within educational contexts. So I do a lot of work around looking at how AI impacts children's rights, but also how we can involve children and engage children in conversations around the future of AI and how children can be involved in decision making around the ways that AI systems are developed and used, but also how they're governed and what policy or regulatory responses to AI might be. And yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of how that relates to the discussions today, a large part of that is thinking about how we teach about AI and how that teaching feeds into engaging children in those discussions.
Brilliant. So in terms of your background, what was your journey to get to being in the Alan Turing Institute? What was your particular linear or wiggly line to get there?
Yeah, definitely not linear. a very wiggly route. I mean, I originally studied sociology after school, university studied sociology, and then went on to do a master's in environment and development. A lot of my interest has always been around, I guess, the role of technology in society and how technology impacts society, and then the impacts of technology on society. I definitely when I was younger would not have thought of myself as being somebody to go down a kind of STEM path. I very much was at school, at university, I studied languages and arts and drama and philosophy and sociology, and was not somebody who would have predicted that I would have gone into kind of a science and technology focused career. But yeah, very interested always in how technology impacts society. I did a PhD looking at renewable energy and particularly how members of the public could become involved in planning processes around contentious technology developments, particularly onshore wind farms. And that really got me into working in the space of public engagement with science and technology. So following that, I worked for quite a number of years looking at public involvement in health research and ways of involving members of the public or patient groups in discussions around uses of health data in health research. that began to move more into the area of AI, because a lot of this work was then looking at how people's data might be used to train AI systems that might be used in health contexts or in relation to medical research, which started to kind of move me in that direction. I then spent a couple of years at Newcastle University, where I was looking at the role of machine learning AI in banking and finance, and again, how members of the public might become involved in shaping decisions around the ways that machine learning might be used in banking and finance. And then from there, I moved to the Alan Turing Institute, where I now work broadly across AI and data science, very broadly across all kind of sectors and industries, and looking at the role that AI plays in society, looking at ethical and social considerations around that, but still with a very particular focus on then what does that mean for members of the public to become involved in these discussions and shape these discussions, and how can we make that more participatory, more inclusive.
Yeah, so as you were talking there, I was kind of trying to track what I figured the common thread might be, and it seems to be that desire to really engage across all stakeholders and really make sure that we don't fall into something by accident. It's kind of helping to engage people to be informed about what's happening in their lives, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. To be informed, but also to have a role in shaping those futures. And that is the central thread that runs through everything that I've done. It's all about participation and engagement. And yeah, I guess sometimes challenging established or traditional views of what counts as expert knowledge within discussions around science and technology, and really thinking about how we can open that up to different perspectives, different viewpoints, different experiences, and recognizing that to have good decision making around science and technology, we need to include the widest possible range of experiences and perspectives. And that's very much been the kind of the central focus, or the driver for everything that I've done.
Okay, so obviously the background to this podcast is specifically aimed at educators and concentrating around about the term pedagogy. So is that a term that you're familiar with? And if so, how does that sit within your thinking?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I suppose pedagogy to me, it's about, I suppose the approaches and the values that underpin methods you might use in teaching. And for me, I have in the past, I was a teaching fellow at the University of Edinburgh for a while, so I have varied teaching experience across different contexts. But I suppose for me, in most of the work that I do, it's teaching or education is a part of the engagement work that I do, although it's very much more about kind of learning together and learning with people who we might be engaging with. But there's an element of, first of all, having to introduce new ideas and new concepts. And pedagogy definitely is an important part of that, in terms of thinking about what are the values or what are the approaches that underpin the methods to doing that. So yeah, it's definitely a component of thinking about the ways that we engage.
So one of the things that has come up in discussions with some of the other folk that I've talked to recently around about education has been the fact that we need to do a lot of thinking in education about how AI might impact our approaches to teaching and learning. So, and particularly given that with the machine learning that's there even at the moment, that kind of the knowledge aspect and the recall and the regurgitation of facts that has kind of in the past been the focus of teaching and learning in schools, learn all of these facts, be able to talk about the history of the timelines and things, that can be done far better and almost instantaneously now by the kind of technology tools we have around us. So the impact, what does that kind of understanding of AI that you have, but combined with your understanding of education, begin to think about how we can move things in that sphere or change our thinking? Yeah,
no, I think that's really interesting. And that is, like, obviously when ChatGPT came out at the end of 2022, that's when we suddenly saw this kind of explosion of interest around generative AI being like one category of AI that was really where we saw big leaps forward. And a lot of the response to that initially was around concerns around how this might be used by students to submit coursework that was AI generated instead, or to use it as a way of raising big questions about the future of assessment and to what extent we can really verify that this is students' work. But it also opened up bigger questions around what it is that we're actually assessing. Like, what do we want to achieve through assessment? What is it that we're measuring or evaluating in education? And if it is just about regurgitation of facts, well, that's in some limited circumstances that there's an element of that in assessment. But actually, most times what we're looking for is critical engagement with the subjects, reflection on what has been learned. Demonstrating that reflexivity, demonstrating an engagement and understanding, which can't come through regurgitation of facts, and definitely can't come through use of AI tools. And I should also say, I think that a lot of the concern that did come out around that time when ChatGPT was released, a lot of that was massively overblown in terms of how students might misuse these tools or might use them to submit courseworks that were AI generated, massively overblown. And I think actually what that reflects is a wider tendency in media or in public discussion to put this kind of negative focus on students and how students might misuse tools, rather than actually AI tools are very often and very many different ways being used to survey and monitor students and have impacts on students that are not always positive. And I think that there's this kind of tendency to kind of demonize students, that students are going to misuse these tools. And actually, the research that has been done more recently looking at how students have engaged with these tools has found that only a very, very small number of students are actually using these tools to cheat. In most cases, students might be using them to help with formatting or to help with maybe getting started on writing something, but not to actually use them for the content. Because I think there is an understanding that what we want to assess learning, and we want to assess engagement with the topics and the understandings, and AI tools can't do that. Also, if you're using them to write an essay or something, probably your essay is not going to be very good. Probably it's going to be full of lots of inaccuracies. They can't be relied on for facts, for understanding. They're a stylistic tool. They don't provide substance. So I think that's an area where it's led to some really interesting conversations about how we might rethink assessment. But actually, the tools themselves often, they don't deliver what maybe was originally some of the hype has suggested that they might deliver.
Okay, so you talked there about rethinking assessment and kind of, rather than focusing on the negative, starting to think about how we can make use of the positive aspects of it. So what are the kind of the themes that are coming through with the research projects that you've been involved in or read, or the work that some teachers are doing who have embraced it?
Yeah, I suppose firstly, it's really important to take a cautious and realistic approach to this. There's been a lot of hype, a lot of sensationalism around what generative AI might deliver, lots of claims that it's going to kind of revolutionize the way that we live and work and lead to all these transformative benefits. Most of that is massively overblown and massively overhyped. It's not realistic. And actually, I think in education contexts, there's lots of things being proposed, everything from using generative AI to create virtual tutors, which it exists, that they are available, to create immersive learning environments, for example, like bringing history lessons to life through AI generated content and characters, so immersive experiences, creating personalized learning plans, automating marking. All of these are areas where I think that we need to proceed with real caution, because there are big concerns around what this actually might do. But I think where we see the biggest possibilities, or the most kind of realistic advantages maybe using these technologies, is not actually in the the kind of front end interaction with students or interactions with learners. It's actually in helping with some of the tasks that actually take up a lot of educators' time, like lesson planning, report writing, and some of the kind of administrative tasks. And that's because mostly what AI does really well is process complex information, more efficiently handle large volumes of data. It can be used to summarize text or reformat text, or this kind of more tasks that can be more easily automated. But anything that involves an understanding of context or an understanding of social relationships, or really any kind of social understanding, AI can't do that. It never will be able to do that. So anything where it's really interaction with students, we need to be very, very cautious. Now, these are tools, and they can be used as tools for some particular tasks, but we shouldn't be anything which I guess relates to the relationships between educators and learners. We need to be very, very cautious about using those tools in those contexts. So yeah, I think for me, it's about seeing these as things that complement the expertise of human educators, and complement or enable support educators through increasing efficiency in the tasks that take up a lot of time that can often take away from the time that educators are spending with students, with learners. And then that really frees up that time and frees up the educators to focus on things that you need the human capacities for the relationships, for the interaction, for understanding students and for working with students. And that's where I see the biggest advantages.
That's really interesting. So you were talking about working with children and young people to start to explore their understanding, but also use and incorporate their views to shape the way that these things move forward. So could you tell us a bit more about that and what children and young people are telling you about AI and their hopes and fears?
Yeah, so this is at the Turing Institute, we have a stream of work around children and AI, and that is partly looking at how AI impacts children's rights, and we've done some work with UNICEF and also currently with the Council of Europe, looking at existing frameworks around children's rights and AI. We also have a 2-year project, a collaboration with the Scottish AI Alliance and Children's Parliament, who are based in Scotland, where we've been working with 4 primary schools across Scotland, in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Stirlingshire and Shetland. And in each of those primary schools, we're working with classes of children between the ages of 8 and 12 to talk to them about AI. The first phase of the project was really finding out what children already knew about AI, introducing concepts of AI to the children, and then discussing with them how AI might impact children's rights, how children want to be involved in the future in shaping decision-making around how AI impacts their lives. And then now in the second phase, children are being engaged in discussions with decision makers, policymakers, developers, and exploring how we can involve children more in these conversations and shaping future development, but also governance of AI systems. And it's amazing. It's amazing both to see the children's engagement with that, but also to hear the responses from decision makers, where they're often kind of taken aback by the children have really important, insightful things to say, and sometimes challenging things to say. But by having that child-centered approach, we can develop AI systems that are more appropriate, that are safer for children to engage with, but also that might have wider benefits that wouldn't have been anticipated or wouldn't have been planned if it hadn't been for children's involvement in shaping these systems. But in terms of what children have been saying about AI, it's been really interesting to have this engagement process and to really hear from a child's perspective what AI means to them. And obviously it's been a bit of a journey where children have learned more about how they already interact with AI, how AI already has an impact on their lives. And what's come out really clearly from all the discussions with children, is that they really want to focus on the topic of fairness, how AI systems can be developed that are fair for all children, and recognizing that different children will have different needs, and an AI system that might be used to make a decision about, say, allocation of services or personalization in education will need to be designed to take account of different needs and different experiences of diverse children. And that's been a really, really strong theme through all the discussions that we've had with children. And they're very quick to get to grips with how AI systems are designed and developed, and recognizing that that fairness is really a key consideration. If AI systems are designed with or trained on data sets that aren't fully inclusive, or that have biases within those data sets, they're going to lead to unfair or unrepresentative outcomes, and that has meaningful impacts for decisions that are made based on those AI systems. for somebody working in the area of AI ethics, that's a major theme of work that we grapple with, and it's something that we try to address, and that is really important in terms of policy and regulatory responses around AI. But speaking to the children, it was something that they got in half a day. They were coming up with solutions, and they had ideas, and it's amazing. And I think it really shows the value of these approaches and of involving children in these discussions, and recognizing that their voices really they really matter, but they really have something to say, and they can really add something to those discussions. So yeah, it's been an amazing process.
It's really powerful hearing you talk about that, when I'm thinking about the kind of work that we're trying to move forward in education around about really using learner voice and child voice to kind of inform how we take things forwards in schools and in lessons and more broadly across the wider community. So it sounds like we could learn a lot from how you've done that. And it's that authentic impact of gathering their voice so that they can actually see that they are making a difference, rather than we've just taken it and stuck it up on a wall somewhere. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think that's what's really important is to have that direct engagement with decision makers, with people who are actually going to act on this. And it's also important that those decision makers are engaging with the children. And this is also what I found in other areas of work that I've done in terms of public engagement with science and technology. There's often quite vocal kind of commitments to public engagement or children's engagement, but if the decision makers aren't in the room, then all too often, if something comes out, a recommendation or a finding comes out, it's very easy for it to be written off as like, well, maybe they didn't understand this, or maybe they didn't have access to this information, or if you told them this, or if you'd explained it this way, they would have responded differently. They would have maybe agreed with what we were proposing. But if decision makers are in the room and they experience that conversation, the quality of the conversation, the depth of engagement, the nuances of the perspectives, it's kind of impossible for them to write it off as like, oh no, that they have to, through experiencing that process, there's a recognition of the value of that and the value of taking that on board and addressing it in decision making processes.
That's really exciting. So, from the kind of topics that we've hit on and the way that you've framed your knowledge of what's taking place at the moment and where it's going, in terms of an educator's day-to-day practice, where are the areas that they should be focusing on finding out about, and where are the areas that they should maybe park for a little bit because it might not be as helpful as they think it might be so far?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I guess, as I've already said, like we definitely shouldn't be swept up by hype and excitement around AI and all these kinds of claims about how AI is going to, significantly make your day easier, revolutionize how you work. Like all of that needs to be taken with a substantial grain of salt, and all to very cautiously engage with these technologies. But what I think is really important is to develop a critical understanding of AI systems, and that's important for educators to, I guess, to make informed choices about what systems we might implement or use, or what might be appropriate in different contexts for different purposes. But it's also really important for having conversations with students, with learners about AI. AI is definitely going to be a large part of how people live and work in the future. I mean, it already is today, but that's going to be increasingly so in the future. And I think that it's important that educators are preparing young people to engage with AI tools and have an understanding of how they might use them in the future. But that has to be with a critical understanding of the limitations of these tools, of the risks that these tools present, in order to make good decisions about how we use them. And that's really been a big part of the work that we're doing with Children's Parliament and Scottish AI Alliance around engaging children with this. It's what I think is really exciting and special about that work is that often when there's like, I guess, engaging children or engaging schools with science and technology, it often takes an approach of being very much about, here's what's exciting about this technology, here's how you might use it in the future, or let's build the skills to allow young people to go into careers where they might build these systems in the future. And actually, that's not at all the approach that we take. Children's Parliament is very much based on a child rights perspective. So the conversations start with discussing children's rights. What are your rights? And then how might technology impact those rights? And that's a completely different way of talking about science and technology than normally happens. And it leads to different conversations. But I think that's really, really important, because yes, we want to increase understandings of science and technology, but more importantly, we want to equip young people with the skills and the critical understandings to be able to ask questions about these technologies, and to be able to make informed choices about how the ways that they interact with them, but also to have a role in shaping policy, in demanding explanations, in demanding answers, and holding these technologies to account. And I think that's a really big part of the ways that educators need to engage with these systems and these technologies. And I also because the ways that AI is implemented in education will have a really big impact on how people interact with these systems, or what their expectations of these systems are in the future, particularly with areas where AI is being used in education settings in lots of different ways that are around kind of surveillance and monitoring of students and learners, and that there's a real risk that normalizes the experience of being surveyed and monitored.
So can you give me a bit of so I'm thinking, I can understand this on a quite an abstract level, but I'm thinking kind of how would that look like just now? What would I be using in the classroom, and where would I go to find out the information about the tools that I'm using?
Yeah, okay, well, I mean, there's lots of different examples. When I was mentioning surveillance and monitoring, there are AI systems that are used to track learners' attainment, can be used to create personalized learning plans, can be used very beneficially, but they're often not with the consent of a learner in terms of how the data might be tracked and used. There's also examples of, say, in universities, of AI systems being tracked to attend attendance at lectures, at classes, and some what I would consider more concerning examples of AI systems that are where there are claims being made that they can track attention, or provide an assessment of the extent to which a student is paying attention or is engaging with content.
Wow, really?
Through online learning. That's really troubling. Any system that claims to understand emotion or attention is something that where there's really very, 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 very limited evidence of the extent to which these work. Also, often don't take account of neurodiversity or cultural differences, and we should proceed very cautiously with anything that claims around being able to say something about emotional engagement. But we also see, there are, with all the concerns about the ways how students might use AI systems to cheat on courseworks, there's also been a lot of investment in then AI detection tools, which are then using AI to detect wherever a student might be using AI. And these systems will also have very, very low levels of accuracy. So, tools which are supposedly can detect whether an essay might have been created using a text generator, have incredibly low levels of accuracy, and particularly low levels of accuracy for students who are writing in a second language or not their first language, and that leads to new forms of potentially discriminatory outcomes. But it also, what troubles me most, or what troubles me a great deal about this, is that it's potentially breaking down relationships of trust between educators and learners, and increasingly these tools are being used to survey and monitor and rather than I suppose potentially damaging those relationships and putting too much of an emphasis on making assessments of trustworthiness of students, and it leads to this kind of culture of suspicion, which I think is really unhealthy. And actually what we need is to have openness and trust within those relationships, where students and educators can communicate openly and can discuss their assessments, and it not be all about suspicion and monitoring. That I think is really worrying. And as we see these technologies rolled out more and more, I think the potential for it to disrupt those relationships or to erode trust is a real concern.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, I interrupted you back at the start of this particular subject, where I think you were then going to say, actually, if a child or young person is in an environment where that is normalized, as in there's just a lot of information used about you, and it's, as long as you're doing fine, it's fine, then actually there's almost that kind of accidental consent or ignorance, or kind of just not really recognizing the damage that might be in wider society.
the normalization of monitoring, surveillance, or the normalization of data collection practices where we often there is an option to consent, but it's a tick box at the end of a 300-page document that has been deliberately written so that people won't read it, and that's not meaningful consent. But I think because education has this absolutely central role in shaping ideas or expectations in wider society, and so this is about preparing young people to know, or to prepare them to engage with these technologies and what their expectations of these technologies might be in other contexts and in other parts of their life and society. And so it's really important that we're not just implementing AI systems or systems that might be collecting and processing students' data without giving them an opportunity to critically engage with that and to understand that. And I think that's fundamentally important. Like wherever these systems are being deployed, it needs to be in conversation with the young people who are impacted, with learners, and taking into account their views, their experiences, their concerns and their needs. And doing that can then lead to these systems being used in ways which are beneficial, and in some cases can really help and support learners. But if they're just imposed or deployed without consultation or without being shaped by learners, then it's setting that setting that kind of precedent. And I think that when people go into the world of work or in other areas of their life, they need to know that they have a right to seek explanations, that they have a right to contest decisions that are made, and to hold organizations accountable for the ways that these systems are developed, the ways that they're used, and the ways that they impact their lives. And that's I just think that is so important.
So a lot of this stuff that you've been talking about today is new to me, and it's considerations that I have not sat down and wrestled with yet. So where can I go to find out more sources of information like this so I can start to educate myself more fully about this?
And there's growing body of work, sources of evidence around AI systems and the impacts that they have, particularly within education. At the Alan Turing Institute, we obviously doing a lot of work across. So I work in the public policy program at the Alan Turing Institute, and within that, in the ethics and responsible innovation research team. And we have a lot of work around ethical and social considerations around AI systems. And I've recently produced or in the process of producing a series of workbooks, guidebooks around ethics in practice, which would be a useful set of resources.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking.
And I can sort of share links to these things afterwards. We also have a webpage around AI and children's rights, which includes links to the work we're doing with the Children's Parliament and Scottish AI Alliance around engagement with schools in Scotland, and also around our previous research with UNICEF and ongoing work with the Council of Europe around existing legal frameworks that address AI in the context of children's rights. So come on over to the Turing Institute website.
Brilliant. So I've been kind of taking notes as we go, just trying to make sure that I'm capturing what I think is the key message. And one of the things that I'm hearing here is we don't need to worry too much about the technology of AI rapidly transforming our teaching approaches in the classroom. That bit, the bit that educators and students do, that's the magic bit that actually we don't need to mess with.
We don't need to mess with. Whether we not need to worry about it. I mean, this is all about human choices and organizational choices. So we would need to worry about it if it starts to be rolled out and used. And there are claims being made that it can be used in these ways, and it can really disrupt. And disrupt is often used in a positive way, but it disrupts the methods of education. What I'm saying is that it shouldn't. It should be tools that complement the existing the human capacities of teachers, and not disrupt those relationships between learners and educators.
So, as a classroom teacher going into my class tomorrow, I'm not going to be able to generate Doctor Who and David Bowie and all the other sorts of historical figures that I might want to invite for dinner and let them have a conversation, and that's my lesson. that's not where AI is going right now. But actually, I need to educate myself to understand where I'm using it already, and then to be able to build that understanding of systems together with the learners in front of me.
Yeah, and involve the learners in those conversations. The thing about, I mean, I'm totally up for inviting David Bowie. But there's been lots of claims about how you might use this in like immersive learning environments, and for example, bringing a history lesson to life, or bringing something and combining that with virtual reality or augmented reality. But with that, you have to be really careful, because they can bring things to life and make them feel more real, and perhaps and in some cases that can create really engaging learning environments or learning activities. But they also, these generative AI systems are trained on data sets that are very much imperfect, represent some viewpoints, mostly privileged viewpoints or perspectives, more than others, and underrepresent or misrepresent minoritized communities, minoritized perspectives. And so when we're using these systems to create engaging outputs, there are real substantial risks that they create experiences or representations that are very skewed to represent particular worldviews, particular political ideologies or perspectives, and underrepresent minoritized groups and perspectives. And so that might be a concern for particular kinds of contexts and outputs, but it's something that is often not paid attention to enough, in that if we're using these systems to create immersive learning environments, like whose voices, whose experiences are being represented and whose isn't. And if that's being used to create more engaging experiences, we're actually potentially amplifying and exacerbating existing problems of representation. And so that relates to kind of wider concerns around representation in syllabus or in education. But I think that there's a risk that these technologies can really amplify that, and need to be used with great caution.
Yes. Yeah, okay. So by using the existing tools built and trained on existing data sets as they stand to enhance our curriculum, we run the risk of further entrenching unintentional or unexamined biases that exist already, without doing some of the work that we already want to do about understanding different viewpoints.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I mean, these are tools, and the risk is that they're often with kind of all the hype around AI, they're often suggesting that they can do more than they can do, or that that they can be used to really create outputs, or create new things. But they're always they can only create based on what they've been trained on. And so they're perpetuating existing biases, exacerbating existing issues of misrepresentation or underrepresentation, and they shouldn't be seen as something more than a tool. So the ideas have to come from the people who are designing the systems, or designing how those might be used in a classroom context, and all the care that needs to be taken to think about what they might produce, or what the harms of what they might produce might be, is really important. I think sometimes this isn't new, this isn't exceptional to AI, but because these systems can often be viewed as operating in a kind of technical way, there's a risk that they're not scrutinized in the same way of thinking about, well, what actually are they producing? What are the biases within them? And in educational context, it's an absolute imperative that's kind of the first set of considerations. What are the potential risks, the potential harms, potential limitations of these technologies?
Yeah, so I guess we might consider them to be values neutral because they are a technology, but actually we need to be really scrutinizing the underpinning values of the builders.
Yeah. And at the moment, the challenge is that generative AI models they're based on huge data sets, a huge amount of computing infrastructure that is only really currently accessible to a small number of big tech companies, mostly Silicon Valley big tech companies. And so the models that we're using are from a small number of big tech players that tend to represent a particular set of values and viewpoints. And these models are then deployed in different contexts. You can build systems on top of them, you can integrate them into different systems, but the underpinning model is something that we don't have control of, or we don't have even a great deal of transparency around, what data it's been trained on, or what decisions have gone into developing it in the ways that it's been developed, what mitigations might be in place to address existing biases or limitations of those data sets. And so you can build on top of it, and you can implement it and deploy it in different settings, but the model underneath is something that you don't really have access to. And that is, that's something that needs to be very cautiously engaged with. And I think that in a lot of contexts, certainly over the last year, the last 18 months, a lot of deployment of generative AI has been driven by the excitement and the hype, and there's a lot of experimentation. And often the ways that it's been deployed is kind of rushed ahead of anticipating what the limitations or risks of it might be. And then that's kind of worked out afterwards, and trying to step back from that. But actually, any time you're deploying a new technology or a new system, a new AI system, there needs to be, you need to anticipate what the limitations might be, what the impacts might be, what the harms might be before those systems are deployed. And I think there are particular challenges of building those on the existing generative AI models that we don't have enough transparency around.
Thank you very much. That has been really illuminating for me, and I'm really delighted that there are some kind of workbooks and places I can go to on the Turing website to start to engage more fully in this. So what's next for you and your work, Mhairi?
So yes, continue to work on the area of AI and children's rights, continue to work with the Scottish AI Alliance and Children's Parliament, engaging with free primary schools across Scotland. Also working with the Council of Europe Steering Committee for the Rights of the Child, looking at legal frameworks around AI and children's rights across Council of Europe member states, and then really seeking to develop child-centered approaches to AI. So an aim of the work that we're doing with the Turing is to really develop best practice in child-centered AI, developing approaches where children can be involved in shaping the future of AI systems that impact children's lives, but also involved in shaping policy responses and regulatory responses. And that's a big focus of our work.
Great. Thank you so much. And so you also now get 2 slots on our playlist. So what are the tunes that you're going to be adding?
I can't tell you how much I've agonized over this. And it's not been an easy choice. In part because I was thinking about songs about AI, and I went down a fairly negative route. So I thought, no, this has to be inspirational. And so my first song, and because a lot of the work that I've been doing, particularly Children's Parliament, is really focused in children's rights, and a rights-based approach to engagement. So my first song is going to be Bob Marley's Get Up, Stand Up. Because of course it's all about standing up for your rights, and that is really the focus of the work that I'm doing in this space. And the second one, we've already mentioned David Bowie, and I am a David Bowie super fan. Some people might call it an obsession. So it has to be David Bowie, but there are many possible choices of a David Bowie song. But because a lot of what we'll be discussing is around, I guess, how technology is perhaps changing approaches to education, and the importance of kind of keeping pace of education, keeping a pace of the changes or adapting to changes in technology, and also, like, a lot of David Bowie songs are about embracing individuality and having confidence in young people to shape their own destinies and their own futures. So there are a few songs around that, but anyway, maybe it's an obvious one. I'm going for David Bowie's Changes.
Yeah, good stuff. That was brilliant. Thanks, Mhairi. You've given me a lot of thought, and I think I was thinking maybe in the application of tools rather than the bit around about the actual considerations of how they've gotten to where they are, so that I'm going to move my thinking a few steps prior now. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we're really pleased to been able to chat about it all.
Brilliant.